Good afternoon. I hope you're all having a wonderful day. It's nice to see some familiar faces, and to those of you who are just joining us, my name is Christy Beck. I'm from Ohio University, and I'm the past president of the National Communication Association. Just as a little bit of background for those of you who are just joining us, about 4 years ago, the National Communication Association established the NCA Anti-Bullying Project with a big goal of taking some of the research that we have done over the last several years and not just publishing it in communication journals, but making deliberative efforts to get it out into the community and into the hands of those who could utilize it to help enhance our communities. So this is one of those initiatives, and we thank you for joining us this afternoon. I am delighted to introduce the third session that we're conducting today. This is Leading for a Bully-Free Workplace. And our co-presenters this afternoon are Gary Bailey. And Gary is a faculty member at Abilene Christian University. He teaches communication and conflict management. And he has a PhD in intercultural and organizational communication from the University of Oklahoma. And Stacy Ty Williams is an assistant professor of organizational communication at Iowa State University, and she specializes in workplace bullying and harassment. And I will turn it over to the two of them.
All right. Welcome, and thank you for taking time out of your busy day to learn with us today. So this session is really designed to help leaders to understand what they can do and to give you strategies to help lead for more healthy environments. So overview, we'll define it. So that's one thing that people often have questions about. What is it? How do you distinguish it from other things? We've talked a bit about this in other sessions, so I won't belabor it, but it's just for those of you who haven't been there to get that information. The next is prevalence and cost, right? So at a leadership level, I think it's really important that leaders understand what the costs are, so that tends to be what helps people in leadership positions take it seriously. Discuss solutions. So what can we do about it? If we witness it, if we have issues within our own departments that we oversee, what can we do? And then we have a couple of scenarios because we wanted to be able to give you some interactive hands-on experience in working through these things. And then finally, we'll have some time at the end for you to explore some of the questions that you have for us. So, start off with this. I'm sure maybe some of you have seen some of these films. So, Horrible Bosses, Kevin Spacey plays a horrible boss, right? Devil Wears Prada. This one is Glengarry Glen Ross with Alec Baldwin, Swimming with Sharks, also Kevin Spacey. Seeing a pattern here, right? And then 9 to 5, right? So all of these movies depict people in leadership roles who are really bad actors, right? And they are bullies, and some of them end up getting their comeuppance in the end. 9 to 5, they kidnap him, right? We're not advocating for that at all. But in these shows, I think some of those behaviors, unfortunately, people can relate to when they think of their own boss. So I just bring that up to kind of give you some of the behaviors and a sense of what I'm thinking about and talking about when we're thinking of a bullying boss. Okay. So what is workplace bullying? We've talked about this, but to reiterate, it's verbal and nonverbal acts. So bullying is largely communication, right? How it gets enacted and how we address it is a communication issue that are directed. So that's the intentionality component of it at one or more employees over an extended period of time. So usually within these definitions, there's some sort of duration. For most organizations, does anybody have any idea of what that magic duration is? That they would call, okay, this enough time has elapsed that I might call it bullying. Does anybody have any idea of what that is? It's usually 3 to 6 months, somewhere in there, that this pattern of behavior has occurred over a period of time. And then there's intentionality to it, that there is an intent to cause humiliation and harm. So not all negativity is bullying. And so I think it's really important to point that out. But again, the hallmarks of these things are the intentionality over a period of time. So there's some sort of duration, intentionality, and then generally there is the power imbalance as a component of this. Okay? All right, so bullying is not the same as firm leadership. Okay, so people come to me often and they'll say things like, I'm firm leader, right? And so I think that people might misconstrue what I'm doing as bullying. Well, there's a difference between firm leadership and bullying, okay? What is that distinction? Does anyone have an idea of what that distinction is between being a firm leader, which is completely acceptable, and being a bully? Where does that line get crossed? Yeah.
Intent has a lot to do with it.
Absolutely. Intent. So if you're a firm manager, right, your intent isn't to cause humiliation and harm of an employee, right? Maybe it's so that you can meet quotas or get done what you need to get done, or that you have high expectations of your employees because you know that they're great and that they can excel. Okay, so there is a distinction, and that intentionality to cause humiliation and harm is a big part of it. Okay, because in organizations, part of it is corrective feedback, right? And that's not bullying. But when we have intentionality to humiliate and create harm, that's when we've crossed over into the realm of bullying. That's when, as a leader, you need to check your behavior, or if it's happening more broadly in your organization, that's when we need to intervene. Any questions about that distinction? Okay. All right, common bullying behaviors. Yelling, insults. If we think back to the movies that I showed in the very beginning, right? Pretty similar, right? Gossiping is another component of workplace bullying. Constant criticism. So constant criticism is different than corrective feedback. So if we have a performance review and we give people things to work on, great. But if we are constantly criticizing someone's every move, that is problematic. Silent treatment is another one. Physical intimidation, that is another. I'm going to show on Gary here, but if you have someone that just hovers over you, sort of using their size to make you feel smaller, less than, or uncomfortable, that's physical intimidation, right? Obsessive surveillance. This one happens more frequently than we think. So I've worked with people who their bully would follow them every time they left their office. They would follow them even to the bathroom, making sure they weren't taking too much time in the bathroom. I've had other people who would buy metallic picture frames and situate them on their desk because the way their office was situated, it was towards the door, and they could always sense that somebody was watching them. And so these metallic picture frames would allow them to see the reflection of that person sort of lurking in their doorway. And the reason they were lurking is because they were trying to find them doing something wrong. That I watched you and you were on Facebook, or I watched you and you were blah, 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 okay? So obsessive surveillance is obviously something that makes people feel very uncomfortable, not surprisingly. And then the other one of the other ones, there are many other ways, but these are some of the more common ones, are withholding information or resources, okay? So these are some of the more common bullying behaviors. So what does all of this mean? Well, if roughly, the statistics differ, but 1 in 4, roughly 30%, somewhere in that range of people will experience it at some point in their careers. And in certain industries, these numbers are higher. Okay, we're going to have our final session on bullying in healthcare. And in healthcare, nursing, teaching, etc., these numbers are even higher. Okay, so costs. So Heinz Lehman was the one who coined the term workplace bullying. So workplace bullying is different than, say, sexual harassment, right, or discrimination. And what distinguishes workplace bullying from harassment. It's a form of harassment, right? But what is the distinguishing feature of workplace bullying? Why can't we just call it all harassment? Anybody know? Any guesses?
Is it the targeting?
Okay. In harassment and discrimination, people are still being targeted. That's a good guess, though. What distinguishes bullying from other forms of harassment or discrimination?
Maybe there's not clear laws around it.
Bingo, right? So if we're talking about sexual harassment, we have laws against that, right? If we're talking about discrimination, we have laws. We don't have that for bullying, okay? We don't have any laws that protect people, okay? There are people who have been trying to pass them. Gary Namey at the Workplace Bullying Institute has been trying to do state-by-state legislation, but hasn't been incredibly successful in getting these kinds of laws passed state by state. So Lehman was the one who coined this term and sort of distinguished it from some of these other types of behaviors that we have in organizations. And he said in the societies of the highly industrialized Western world, the workplace is the only remaining battlefield where people can kill each other without running the risk of being taken to court. Now, he didn't mean literally, right? It's that we know that there are severe health costs that bullying has for employees within organizations. So human toll, helplessness. If anybody has ever been bullied in the workplace, it's a really isolating, alienating experience. And when you are in a low power position, there really aren't very many things that you can do about it, right? So people I work with get all sorts of advice. Well, I'd stand up to them, or I'd quit, or I'd do all of these things. Well, they often point out that they need their job because they have a mortgage, right? They need to eat. And they don't stand up because it's my boss. And I'm afraid if I do, it's going to get worse, or I'm going to get fired. And so this helplessness, right? What can I do? I'm miserable. This is terrible. But I don't really feel like I have very many options. And so you just kind of feel like you're treading water, hoping to keep your head above it. Alienation, anxiety. So if you're being bullied, many people, it's really hard to go to work when you know that you're going to face the person who's making your life miserable, right? So there's a lot of anxiety that surrounds that. Stress, burnout, PTSD, hypertension, heart disease, depression, in some cases suicide. Physicians will tell patients who are experiencing severe bullying that they just need to quit their job or they're going to die, right? It seems dramatic, but that's the reality for people. Organizational costs. So it's also costly for organizations, okay? Turnover is a big one, okay? And really toxic cultures, sometimes we have this revolving door of people, okay? So turnover is a biggie. Lost productivity and efficiency. So if someone is making your day miserable, you're probably not going to be doing your best work, right? Because we have so much mental space, right? And so lost productivity and efficiency, poor climate, we all know the costs of that. Low job satisfaction, increased absenteeism, decreased organizational commitment. I talked last session about the cascading effects, the trickle effects. So this decreased organizational commitment happens, it's a wildfire that spreads because people who are witnessing it also get impacted, okay? And lawsuits. So people are suing organizations who are being bullied and they're winning despite not having laws, okay? So one example, a couple of employees at the University of New York won $1 million settlement for bullying, not harassment, not discrimination, bullying. All right. So, poll for you. What is the most common outcome of bullying situations? A, bullies get fired. B, targets leave the organization. Or C, I guess I had 1, 2, 3. 3, okay, organizational authorities are notified and intervene. Okay, by a show of hands, how many of you think it's 1? 2? 3? Any 3s? Perfect, 100% score for Shriners Hospital employees. Yes, absolutely. Bully or the target leaves. 77% of cases, the target leaves voluntarily or involuntarily. Okay, so that is typically the outcome in these situations. Now, let me ask you, once that target leaves the organization either voluntarily or involuntarily, does the problem end? No. Why not? The bully chooses another victim. It's a cycle. It's a cycle of behavior that will continue unless the bullying is addressed. Okay? Bless you. The reason for that is that bullies tend to thrive on control and power. And so they will keep targeting people within the organization. It's worked well enough to this point. There aren't many sanctions. So why would you change your behavior? Right? In fact, there are many cases where people who demonstrate bullying behavior get promotions. Okay? We'll fix the problem. We'll promote the bully. Then we've separated the target and the bully. And our problem's solved. Well, you've just added fuel to the flame, right? Because you've given that person more power. You're also, as a byproduct, teaching other employees that this is the kind of behavior that you admire, right? So if employees behave in this way and you promote them, okay, well, I need to be a jerk then, because that's the only way I'm going to be promoted and get myself into a leadership position in this organization, right? So it has additional cascading effects that people need to be mindful of. Solutions. That's what we really need to think about. So what do you think are the most common solutions we have?
Like workable solutions or?
Well, how do leaders typically respond? So if somebody comes to a leader and says, I'm being bullied, or if a leader observes it, usually leaders know what's happening, if they're good at all, right? Hopefully they have a pulse on what's happening in their department. What do leaders typically do, either when somebody reports it or they recognize or notice that there's a problem? No. No, they typically do not do direct confrontation or bring the bully in. Avoidance, yes, these are pretty typical, right? So frequently, leaders within organizations sort of take a hear no, see no, speak no evil approach when it comes to addressing bullying, okay? Why?
They're hard conversations.
They absolutely are hard conversations, so it's easier to put our head in the sand and just hope it goes away.
Oftentimes people come to you but don't want their name to be associated with it, so it would be hard to actually approach that person if the person who's being bullied wants to remain anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
And you have no specific situation to share.
Right. So if somebody wants to remain anonymous, it's difficult to actually intervene. And it's difficult to address someone's behavior anonymously, too.
And I think a part of intervening sometimes is investigation. And so sometimes that takes time
Mm-hmm.
to find out whether the observations as a person has made them, or whether there's more to the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
In addition.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, because there are a lot of questions that you need to ask. We need to get to the bottom of things, and so that can absolutely take time. Okay.
And
Yes.
sometimes you just want it to go away.
And many times, yes, we just want it. We want it to go away, but it's not going to go away unless we actually implement best practices and strategies for dealing with it. So this is not how we want you to respond. This is not how you should respond. So let's talk through tools on how to have some of these difficult conversations. All right, so this one, it's a little hard to see. now you're just being paranoid, okay? So sometimes what happens is if a person reports this behavior, either if they're a bystander or if they're the target themselves, people say, don't you think you're overreacting? And that's the go-to response. That's that first initial response that people have. Okay, so if you were a target and you responded to a leader or HR or reported this to a leader or HR, and they responded this way, what would your next course of action be? What do you do? You've got nothing. Okay? That's why 77% of people leave. And these are not bad employees that we're talking about. Targets tend to be very committed. They love their job. They're willing to put up with this for so long because they got into the position they're in because they love it. Okay? So treat each case seriously. Now, this doesn't mean that every report is bullying 110%, right? But by getting to the bottom of it, treating each case seriously, asking questions, lots and lots of questions. For targets, these things can be very difficult to talk about. So I looked at the stories people tell about being bullied in part of my research. And some of these stories were very difficult to track and follow and understand. There wasn't a clear beginning, middle, end to them. And so those stories are typically discounted. But what I found is that those were the people who tended to be suffering the most severe forms of treatment, because when we think about bullying, it happens over a period of time. So when did it begin? Well, I first sort of noticed, and then this happened. Well, maybe it was this, but I don't really know why it's happening. So if you're a leader or an HR person, well, that story doesn't hold up. It doesn't make sense, so it must not have happened. Let's move on. So by treating each case seriously, this also means asking lots of questions and not discounting stories, even though at first they may seem a little off, or that they don't sort of ring true exactly. Okay, so treat each case seriously. It's very, very important. Next, never advise parties to work it out on their own. I cannot stress this enough, but this is a very frequent reaction that people have. You're grown-ups, work it out. You can do it. You shouldn't need me. I'm not your babysitter. I'm your boss. Work it out. I don't want to hear anything more about it. But as I've said, this isn't going to fix the problem. Especially, think about it. We're talking about a power imbalance. So the bully has power over a target. So who's going to win in that working it out on their own? The bully, right? Create healthy organizational climates. So what are some ways that you, as leaders, have worked to create a healthy organizational climate here? What are some of the strategies you've been using here that you know of?
Do things like hold open forums, or there's one thing.
Okay, holding open forums. We're here.
Yeah.
All right.
Talk to us.
We're here.
Tell us what's bothering you, engagement surveys, those kind of things, right?
Being open to it. There are some organizations that don't even want to bring up discussions of bullying
Yeah.
because they don't want to open up a can of worms.
Holding this conference here as an example, I think, of trying to create a culture that is recognizing this as an issue and we'll learn about.
And I think that, you know, in trainings, you know, we had the whole accountability, which kind of included that, being accountable for the things that are happening, you know, for your employees underneath you, including bullying, having an open door policy. You know, I think that all kind of led into this too, as far as, you know, being accountable as a leader. And that includes making sure your employees are okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And going beyond policy and going beyond having people, you know, sort of signing their commitment to a healthy workplace is also talking the talk, right? So if there are issues that you do take action, right? Because sometimes we have policies, but we don't really enforce them, right? So that's that's a good point too. The next thing is to encourage employees to come forward. So at my university, the dean said to all new faculty members, if there is a problem, I want you to come to me. I do not want to hear about harassment or bullying second or third hand. I want you to know that I'm a safe space and that I take these things seriously. Which was good to hear, because it's very scary as a new faculty member to imagine going to the dean if you did have a problem, right, with one of the people in your department, a senior faculty member, or what have you. So statements like that are very, very, very helpful for employees to be more likely to actually come and report issues to you. That's a very simple statement, but if you are committed, those sort of open door policies and saying to your followers, you know, I do take these things seriously. I hope you will come and talk to me about issues that you have.
Sometimes when you have the bullying incident, you can localize, you can keep it in its smaller form and deal with it, but sometimes it spreads. You know, it grows over time. And some organizations now are holding listening meetings when it is obvious that this is a broad and lots of people are involved in difficult time. You can have a listening meeting where you don't say anything, you just listen to the employees talk, and it's an opportunity, like the open forum, but it's a time where they can express and you're not going to give any kind of response, well, here's what we're going to do. It's just listening.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Does anybody have any questions at this point so far that you're wondering about? Okay. Implementing policy and educating employees about them. So, does Shriners have a bullying policy? Okay, harassment policy that lumps bullying into the harassment policy, but that's what you have.
I've never seen bullying actually in the documentation.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen it. Maybe there is.
I can see call it out in the handbook,
Yeah,
In the handbook,
in the
Employee handbook.
that's what I was looking at.
employee orientation handbook, yeah. It's not a separate policy.
It's
though, like-
lumped into the harassment
Yeah,
policy.
yes, it is.
3.2, section 3.2.
In the fine print. Yeah. Yes. So some organizations have bullying policies and people are completely unaware that they exist. So obviously just having the policy isn't enough. You actually do need to educate people about them, make them aware, help them understand how to how to report or what the procedures are if they are experiencing it, which can be done sort of universally or just in a department meeting. Hey, just want you to know we do have this policy as well that we want to make you aware of. Okay. Be supportive. Obviously, this is a big part of it. Being supportive, helping people to understand that, we do take it seriously. And finally, be mindful and pay attention. So again, people are not likely to report this to you. They're just not. Okay? How many of you are in a leadership position currently? Okay, most of you. People are likely not going to come to you, even if you try to create a safe space where people feel comfortable, because it's embarrassing to admit you're being bullied, right? Because again, this is not something that happens to adults. And people want to be seen as professional and that they can handle their own business, and they really don't want to go to a manager or a leader within the organization. They really, really don't. That's usually last-ditch effort. So as a leader, something important for you to do is to pay attention to the dynamics in your departments. How many of you think you could spot problematic behaviors or bullying within your department? Okay, sometimes. Okay, what might complicate your ability to do that? To recognize that bullying is occurring?
I think that when you go out in, in your work areas where your employees work, everybody tends to be on their best behavior, and they don't act like they do when you're, in your office. A lot, because they don't want you to see that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you are actually observing employees, they probably aren't engaging in these kinds of behaviors, right? Not in front of you. Bullying often happens behind closed doors. It's not something that's very visible. And one case that I worked with, the bully was a supervisor, but the other leaders within the organization wouldn't believe the target over a long period of time. And it wasn't until the bully actually completely lost it and got bright red in front of people and started shaking, and it seemed like he was going to hit the target. That was finally the straw. But other people hadn't actually observed his behavior up until this point, and so they didn't believe the target until the bully showed his true colors publicly in front of everyone. Okay, so that's a complication.
I think bullies are also very good at covering their tracks, so they're not necessarily doing something face to face to someone, but they can cover their tracks to make it look like I was just following policy, or I was just doing my job, when their full intent was to do that. So to look at it from a distance, it's hard to see, were they really doing that to spite, or
Absolutely. Bullies tend to be fairly manipulative. This isn't a shock. Should not be a surprise to anyone. And so that manipulation tends to work on leadership. Well, in fact, the bully often is leadership. Okay, yeah.
So have you ever heard of a bully actually kind of doing this, like, bullying towards the leader, and the leader's kind of maybe a little like, wow, do I, what's going on here? Or feel bullied by, and not really sure how to deal with it, or, just kind of covert kind of things that, that's kind of happened as well.
There can be upward bullying, so most people think of it as a leader to a subordinate, but you can have it from subordinate to subordinate, like
Or subordinate
coworkers,
to leader.
and subordinate to leader. It's less common. Usually it's because that person has a powerful role. So it could be a salesperson who brings in millions of dollars every year. And so they feel that they have a lot of clout within the organization and may bully the leader. It can happen in a hospital organization. So surgeons, for example, to CFOs or people who oversee the hospital. It can happen. So that's another upward example of bullying. But usually it's a person who has quite a bit of clout within the organization that bullies upward, or it's a new leader. And so sometimes people within the organization just see them as fresh meat.
Sometimes there's leaders, sometimes there are lower level people who have a relationship with somebody on the upper level, and they can bully their mid-range supervisor by going, knowing that the upper one is going to have their back. And so they can kind of manipulate and get their way with that mid-range. So it's complicated when you have multiple levels that may be at play in that case.
Absolutely.
We may not reach the level of bullying, but I think what can happen is that people can be sharing falsehoods about their supervisor or whatever, gathering the troops to, I don't know, mutiny or something, right? So, I think that can happen as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mobbing, banding together to fight against the boss, so that upward influence. Okay, So we've covered quite a bit of ground. We wanted to spend most of our time doing application because for leaders, I think that's what most really need. You've heard about what these things are. And so I want you to get your hands dirty with coming up with solutions and how we can, yes, get your hands dirty here. So let's start with, this is scenario number 1. And we'll spend quite a bit of time on each one. These are a little bit longer.
Wow, I don't know how you made that much.
We have it right here.
Yeah,
Did you hand her one?
yeah.
Okay.
I'll take one for myself. She forgot to take one.
Okay, did you hand her one? And you want one? So let's take a minute to read over this case. And the names are meaningful here. If you like the names, then I might take credit for them. If you don't like the names, then I might say my colleague wrote this. So go ahead and read this, but Justin Avoider tends to be an avoider. And if you don't get it, Calm Peter is a competitive kind of person. So go ahead and read that, and then we'll have some conversation before we talk as a group. Are we ready to have some collective conversation?
Took over your scenarioing. Yeah, but ask some of those questions when we have Q&A because I think other people will help.
It felt like we had some rich conversations going on in some different pockets. I would love to hear some of those conversations and what you observed, some of your thoughts in response to this case and how you've observed bullying and thought about bullying and what you might want to do in order to prevent bullying. What were some of your thoughts in the different groups? What can you share? Yeah.
So, what if, obviously this guy has threatened physical violence, and so because of that physical violence, I think it almost needs to be not just escalated to the supervisor's level, but escalated above that, to where that person might need to be put on probation or something. But he's obviously making at least one other employee feel uncomfortable to be at work, and it's now escalated.
Of course, it was done privately, so there's no proof. And do you think Com is going to say, "Oh yeah, I threatened him"? Probably a lie.
And I think, and I don't know, I'm new here, so I don't know what our policy is, but I think just because there's an accusation doesn't mean they're guilty, but I think because of the accusation, you have to take it serious.
Absolutely. All right. Good. Thank you. What else? Other observations from your conversations? Is it obvious? Is this a bullying situation?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, there's threats, there's mocking, there's ill intent, and
Stalking.
repetitive stalking, and the fake rumors, it's all to hurt Justin.
It's all there. Yeah.
We had a conversation in our group, actually, with Debbie, who said this person may not even be aware of what they're doing is considered bullying, and that needs to be taken into account.
Well, I think there is a place early where you have to assess whether it truly fits your definition of bullying or whether it's earlier stages of bullying. Stalking is not. I mean, it's pretty clear, and physical violence is
Right.
pretty clear. But there are places where you do have to go, does this person know that some of the behaviors that we might be classifying as bullying are intimidating?
You think somebody might say, "Oh, boys will be boys"?
Where we've heard that recently, yes, okay.
I have someone I do research with. She does a lot of training with people who are classified by their organization as bullies, but because they're top performers, the organization doesn't want to get rid of them. They want to rehabilitate them so that they don't create problems with other high performers. And they typically say they just don't realize that what they're doing is wrong. And I say, well, of course you're going to say that. When you're called out for bad behavior, of course you're going to say, I didn't realize what I'm doing is wrong. But she said, I'll give some scenarios to them, and they really don't see that behavior as being problematic. And so you really do have to educate some people that these kinds of behaviors are are problematic and that you need to change them. And so I found that really interesting because we don't have a lot of data on bullies. That people don't self-identify and want to participate in our research studies. Are you a bully? Come interview. Get interviewed by me. So we don't have as much data on bullies.
Well, a few years back, I did a paper on level of violence in nursing, and so it's some of the literature equates that to bullying.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite line up to your definition. However, what I did was survey people. This is, how often have you been the recipient of these behaviors? How often have you done these behaviors, right? And kind of listed things like gossiping and backstabbing and eye rolling and not listening and whatever. And what was interesting to me was how much feedback I got from people about how taking the survey helped them examine their own behaviors at work that were contributing to a negative culture, right? So that's where I think I came up with that piece of.
And part of the recommendation we've made about making sure employees know what counts as bullying and what the consequences are and so forth, that's what COM needs to hear, is this is bullying and you need to know what the consequences are. So he has an opportunity for redemption, that he can work towards making it right with Justin and making the whole organization a more pleasant place for everybody to work. Question or comment over here?
So I just wondered if she was actually successful with those candidates that were high performers and getting them to understand and changing their behaviors. Has that been a successful endeavor?
Sometimes you win some, you lose some. Yeah, but it has, I think, helped open their eyes to these behaviors that even though they may still struggle a little bit, they are more mindful of how they're impacting other people. And also it sends a message to them that the organization sees them and sees their behavior and that they're putting them through this training is sort of the last ditch effort from the organization. We don't want to lose you, but if you can't change your behavior, we're going to have to. So that's not to incite fear in them, but their behavior is being checked for the first time. And so they do tend to take that seriously.
On the flip side of this, we're all focusing on this Peter, or Colm, but Justin may, after so many months of feeling bullied, puts up a negative wall, and it's going to take a lot of time for that person to put that down and not see everything as a threat to their job, as a threat to themselves, whether or not this bully is taken from the picture. Because the bully has obviously talked to other people in the workplace. And so there's a little bit of rehab that goes on both sides, the victim and.
Right, we talked about the human toll on a bully. What is Justin going through and what does Justin need then? He needs that support. He needs the advocates. He needs the support function that people can provide. Yeah.
What about retaliation from the target to the bully? What do you do with a situation like that where maybe Colm has, done this to Justin and now Colm's been pulled in? What if Justin now retaliates and starts to do some similar behavior back? Or tries to get to the team and gossip or things like that?
That's not really a major thing, is it? Have you seen that in your research?
It happens some that you have, there has been research done on how both parties have a role in it, different roles. But I would say that doesn't happen as frequently, that there is retaliation. It can. But in leadership, that's where the follow-up goes. So if you do intervene, it's paying attention to what happens in moving forward, right? What are the behaviors that people are demonstrating to make sure that those kinds of things don't happen?
I think most of the time the target is really on board with, let's make sure this doesn't happen to other people.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
That's usually their big goal, is that while I was treated terribly, but something good that can come out of this is that I can help other people to not have the same thing happen to them. So that's typically the angle that most targets take in their organization as they become advocates for other people.
Any other observations?
Well, I just have a question. Who's ultimately responsible for taking this situation and managing it and either fixing it or firing or taking it on? Because we were just talking about various scenarios and how long things happen. And that, well, we've done this, and
Mhm.
gone up the chain of command, but not a lot happened. And so,
Well, ultimately, in any kind of conflict situation, you want to localize. You want to make sure it doesn't spread further. So when you do localize, it would be within the department. You want to make sure that you include all of the relevant resources or the people and work through it there. But when in serious cases, you really need to take it to HR or to a supervisor that has charge over the group. If it's wider spread, then HR needs to have a broader input. And we're talking over here about sometimes in really difficult circumstances, if it goes on and on for a long time and things have been swept under the carpet until the carpet is really a foot high off the ground, then that's when you really don't have a whole lot of hope to deal with it internally anyway. You're going to find that you need a mediator to come in and deal with, as a neutral to come in because everybody is not trusted.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I would add is just it depends a little bit on who's doing the bullying. So, and it also depends, something we talked a little bit about is it depends on the role of HR in the organization. So sometimes HR is mostly a mouthpiece for leadership. And so they're going to go along with whatever leadership wants. And if the leader is involved in bullying, then HR isn't going to be really a safe space for you to go to. And so I think it's important that you understand the dynamics of the organization before you can really determine who should be involved. But generally, it's going to be someone in a higher power position who's going to have the ability and the authority to be able to intervene. But certainly, by coworkers can help. Can help with that, but leadership plays a very crucial role.
Our final case is one where we have a leader in the organization who is actually bullying someone of a lower position. So we have Dr. B. Rader, if that makes any sense as a name, doing some things he probably shouldn't. So take a look at this case.
Oh, here, I'll pass those out, Gary.
And then have the same conversations you did before, and we'll talk a little bit about this. Okay, our time is escaping us, but some very delightful conversations. I appreciate your sharing with us some of your observations here. I thought maybe we could share some of those observations for a moment. What did you to learn about Dr. B and some of the other issues that you've raised in your conversations?
Say it. Come on, Scott. Come on. Come on. Scott.
They work here,
Yeah. Oh, well, it was not a direct, but it's a common thing that happens in healthcare. Yeah. Yeah. So, did you think it was a scenario of bullying? Do you think this is bullying?
Yes.
Okay, why?
Name calling.
Okay, absolutely.
Intent to embarrass.
Mm-hmm. Intent,
Goes on all the time.
power imbalance.
Pattern.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Perfect. You have it down. You
Well,
have that
one
down.
of the things that we talk about is how do you maintain that that camaraderie, that good-natured relationship between supervisor and workers and subordinates, but also have the authority to be able to make things go the right direction and inspire good work. What's that line? How do we find the line that we want to walk in that? Has anyone found a good way to relate to subordinates as leaders in a way that maintains authority but also motivates and inspires workers to be honest and to give good feedback.
I think some of the things we discussed were just having open conversations, approaching them and asking questions to try and find out a little bit more information before. Scott gave an example of an accusatory email. So you hear about this, so if you just assume the one story or whatever you heard was correct, then you're not feeling heard as the person who's the target or whatever. So I think having those open conversations and presenting them and being an example
Sure.
can help your staff then maybe come to you before it comes to this or whatever.
Yeah, and you want to be a leader that can follow the rules, but also be personal with your workers too.
Yeah, I think that, to quote another author, he encouraged leaders to always ask this question: why would any reasonable, rational human being behave that way? You start with that, and then seek to gather information and facts and stuff. You'll begin to develop and understand the intent behind what's happening.
Right. And there's a number of people in this operating room that were bystanders, and there's power in numbers. So when they gather together and deal with it, it's going to be a lot easier than just one person going against a supervisor.
I think that if the leadership also said, we acknowledge this is even possible, and come to us and say, I mean, because if you don't feel like you, or that you can even get anywhere with them, but because it's such a child thing, that when you do feel like you should say something, they make you feel like you really should be able to take this because you're an adult. And so knowing that you can have an open conversation with your management, I think just knowing that, for them saying, hey, are you all right today, or how's this things, and I just know that it's not okay. If it is going on, let me know, is also an open kind of, you feel like you could talk a little bit more to them.
I'm sure there's some difficulty with the administration and doctors, where the doctors are, need to be in control of what's going on in the operating room. They have power. And where does administration kind of relate? That's an issue. Yeah.
I just think it's interesting, though, that it's probably happened several times because it's so brazen with everybody and waiting for everyone to be there too, showing a real sign of control and also keeping subordinates subordinate. And if they if they did speak up, then there's going to be, but I think that's the intent of the doctor, is to keep them subordinate by waiting for them to come in, which is which to me would indicate that it's probably happening a lot, is trying to keep everybody below or at my will or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point. This is not corrective feedback, right? This is belittling. So it might be intended to change behavior, but the way it was done there was an intentional intention to cause that humiliation among people by doing it publicly.
I'm wondering if bystanders could bring this back to patient care. Like, what is the mission here? Like, how is this, as a professor, it's how is this helpful to educate my students? How is this going towards patient care? How does this make us Ohio State used to call it workplace of choice, or where people would choose to bring their children or to bring their health problems when they do have a choice, because when it comes down to it, healthcare is a business, right? So the only behaviors that should perpetuate are behaviors that advance patient care. And that removes the egos, hopefully could remove the egos from it, and making it about the patient, saying, I don't think this isn't helpful towards patient care, or something like that could make it less about the aggressor and more about why everyone is supposedly there.
Yeah, I think having a strong mission that embodies what you want for your employees. A lot of time our mission or our strategic plan is about our patients, right, in a healthcare, or our clients if we're in a non-healthcare related situation. But you also need to think about employees in your mission and how you want employees to treat one another and how leadership should treat employees. And so when you have that infused within your organization, then you can go back and rely on that mission. This is not in keeping with who we are as an organization. This is not part of our mission. And so you can, evoke those policies, but it has to be something that, really is infused all throughout the organization. And I'm sure that Heather and Roxana are going to talk about that in a little bit. So I won't belabor that any longer when they talk about healthcare in our last session.
You have a question or point?
I was gonna say, I don't envy this leader and having to deal with this, but it's a double-edged sword of knowing I can destroy the culture of my organization by having all of these people come to me and say, these are our concerns and not dealing with it, but then also letting this major, moneymaker performer for the hospital, because we are, whether we like it or not, we are about money and surgeries and performing as best we can. So it's like, how are you gonna not destroy the morale of your hospital by letting it go on, but then also upset the balance
Right.
of your moneymaker?
It's having the vision, but also if left to the design of the leader in the room, this kind of thing can happen. It's planning ahead, right? Well, we wanted to see if there's any questions, or do you have a wrap-up comments, or?
Well, we have about a couple minutes for any questions, remaining questions of things that we haven't covered. I know we've covered a lot of ground, but is there something that you had a question about or wanted to know more about before we wrap up?
And one thing that kind of what he had just commented that ties back to what you were saying either earlier in this session or last session with that cascading effect. Even if it's one high performer, you were talking about earlier about that cascading effect. If he's destroying everybody else's productivity, right, or she's destroying everybody else's productivity, then that one high performer may actually be doing a long-term disservice financially to that organization, if it goes unchecked. So, it might seem like a good idea, but ultimately they could be, financially destroying the bottom line, even if it, in the short term, looks like a good thing.
It's costly to attract new employees if that nursing staff is splitting as quickly as they can, moving on to other organizations. Although, unfortunately, I think this is a pretty common scenario across hospitals, so people might not leave as quickly. But yeah, it's costly to attract and try to retain and train new people for turnover. So I think that's something to keep in mind in terms of those costs.
I think that when you have, say, a surgeon, sometimes they behave so badly for so long that staff just, they put up with it and they just go, well, that's him, that's the doctor, and they just, it's acceptable. So because their position. And so it's just, allowed, and it's acceptable almost in the profession of healthcare to allow surgeons to behave that way.
Well,
And so the surgeon,
yeah.
and you say, well, oh my gosh, you can't act like that. Well, I've always acted like that.
And it's hard to make change when it's been a thing that's happened this way for so long.
Right.
Yeah.
For the most part, we don't. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Well, one of the things we talked about was when things like this go on for so long and it builds up and there's so much animosity and the conflict is not specific, but everybody feels bad and the morale's down and you don't know what to do. That's when you need to call someone in from the outside. And if it's a conflict such as this, you can bring in the mediator or bring in the organization that is a helper for these kinds of issues.
Okay. Well, we are out of time. You have all been very, very great. Just to
Thank
wrap
you.
up, in terms of leadership, we really have an ability to change. So if you are experiencing some of these things here in your department, or if you're witnessing some of these things happening in other departments, there definitely are things that you can do. But I recognize that these are contextual. So what might happen in one situation may not work very well in another situation. So feel free to reach out to any of us afterwards if you have additional questions that you didn't necessarily want to ask here or feel comfortable asking here. Please feel free to reach out to us. Jennifer has our contact information, or I'm happy to share that with you as well. But thank you very much for your talent and your smarts, and hopefully this can help you create a bullying-free workplace.
Thank you.
Huh? Oh, and evaluation forms, please. We have a half an hour break before the healthcare session.